Hi everybody, and welcome to the final screencast in the course. This screencast we're going to look at assessment and evaluation in the library. So I guess the first question is, we don't think of assessment that often in terms of the library. We think of it in terms of classroom tests. So why should we assess things in the library? And basically there are at least three good reasons. First of all, sometimes we just want to find things out. We want to find out what the students want to read. We want to find out what the teachers need. We want to find out what the students already know about informational resources. We want to find out which books are going out faster and slower. We want to find out how long a paperback will last. How many times can it be checked out before it falls apart? All kinds of things. We just want to find out information. And that's one really good reason that we assess or measure things in the library. A second reason is to evaluate what we're doing in the library. We want to know if what we're doing is helping students. We want to know if we are helping them to enjoy reading. We want to know if we're helping them to get better at reading. We want to know if we're helping them to get better at accessing and understanding and using information. All of those things. So as librarians, we do things in the library and we want to know if they're working. So that's another reason for assessment or evaluation in the library. And typically, the last reason, though, is to show other people what's going on. Not only do we want to know, but we want to make sure that other people, including the teachers and the principal in our building, the district personnel, the parents, and the community, all understand how much our library contributes to the learning of the students in the school, and just how we can contribute not only sometimes to the students but also to the community itself. So again, if we assess, if we evaluate in a more structured, careful way, that carries a lot more weight than if we just try to tell people. So we want to be able to show them with data. So all three of those are really good reasons to assess or evaluate, to collect data and analyze it and organize it and use it about and around our libraries. So, sorry, my PowerPoint managed to get stuck. So, where do we get these data? There are a lot of different places to get data, and I recommend a strategy that I think of kind of as a funnel, where you start off at the wide end with the easy stuff, the stuff you've already got. So one thing that can tell us an awful lot is data that has already been collected by somebody for some reason. And of course, your own library data is the most obvious. Because all the checkout now is digital, you have circulation data, you have usage data. In terms of the books and many of the web resources you can track. But you also, with just a clipboard, can track usage in terms of how many kids come into the library. Your circulation data will tell you which days the library is busiest in terms of checkout anyway. How many times do the teachers bring their classes in? How long do they stay? There's all kinds of library data that you can collect. How many kids are on the computers at a time? Is that a way to build a case for more computers? If you keep track every hour how often the computers are full and no one else can get on, then that's a case to have more computers in the library, all that kind of thing. Student products. If you're doing some kind of program in the library and the students are producing something, if they're writing journals or making checklists or doing concept maps or creating dioramas or writing book reviews or creating book trailers or blogging or whatever, your student products are ready-made data. They're right there in front of you. All you need to do is have a rubric or a structure or a plan for analyzing them. Your school is filled with assessments that have already been done by other people, including informal reading inventories. You have the STAR tests. The AR tests are typically even taken in the library, and oftentimes the librarian is the custodian of them. The DIBELS test, all the benchmarks that most schools do all the time, end of course tests, the new Georgia Milestones test, there's data all over the place. Now, am I recommending that all this data should be gathered and generated? No, not at all. Frankly, I think we benchmark and dibble and AR and a whole lot of other things way too often. But as long as it's happening, you can capture that data and use it to prove the effectiveness or the need for something in your library. So, for example, if your DIBELS data shows that you have a whole lot of third graders that are at intensive, they're at first grade level, that's a really good case for some high-low books to be added to your library, isn't it? To encourage them to read. Finally, you've got data in the office, in students' folders. Now, as a teacher officially in the school, you should have access to these data. But I'm not sure, a lot of times getting individual access is difficult, but aggregated access is not difficult at all. So you can get the average test score data for last year and previous years of all kinds of tests. You can get attendance figures. You can get numbers of discipline referrals, all kinds of office type data. All these data already exist. All you have to do is find them and get them, and you've got it. So that's the easiest. The next easiest thing is to go for data that you can easily collect yourself without a big deal. Your own products, if you've designed a lesson plan or a PowerPoint or something like that, that's data. Your notes about how sessions went. A lot of times, there's a tip on the bottom here, you see it says keep a dedicated notebook. If you're doing a project and you know you're going to want to do some evaluation, have a dedicated notebook for it, either actual or on an iPad virtually, so that every time you think of something or you see something or you hear something, you can enter it right in there. And all your planning is there, everything's in one place. That's a really useful thing when you're doing a project. And one of the purposes of that notebook is that you will have informal teacher or parent or student feedback. And a lot of times somebody will mention something to you in the hall. Oh, so-and-so really loved that book you suggested to him. He's finally reading. Well, you want to get to that notebook of yours and write that down because you're not going to remember it. Or a parent will stop in or call or something like that. Your own observations in the library are a really good source of data, but let me give you one caution here. They need to be structured. In other words, if you just jot down, I saw a lot of kids at that computer all day, that's not very convincing. But if you decide, I think we have a computer problem, we don't have enough computers, and every half hour you set your watch or your phone or something so it rings, and you just look up and on an index card count how many empty computers you've got. Well, if you do that for like a whole week and you show that for most of the day you have no empty computers, now you've got some structured data that you can use to prove to somebody that you need more computers in the library. Okay, student feedback we already mentioned, but you can get student feedback in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to be just casually. You can let them, you can have a library Facebook page where they can post comments. You can have the equivalent on your school website, a library suggestion box. A lot of times you have discussions or conferences with students. So collect those data, take notes, or even if you're having conferences with students, sometimes I like to just record them, audio record them, because otherwise I don't remember what they were. And especially if you have discussion with more than one student, say you're doing a project with a small group of students and you keep meeting, you know, run that little recorder. Tell them you're running it, but run it, and it will help you a lot to remember what happened in those meetings. And of course, projects often generate public results. There'll be a letter to the editor in the newspaper, or a little article in the newspaper, or letters or notes from outside community members, or say your kids, you have a library book drive to benefit the homeless shelter. Well, then the number of books you collected and pictures and photos from presenting them at the homeless shelter and letters from the homeless shelter, those are all data. So there's a lot of data you can collect pretty easily without going into big formal stuff. It's just as you go through day to day. Finally, if you need to, and sometimes you definitely do, you can collect data formally. You can have surveys of students or teachers or parents or outside community members. You can do interviews, again, with all of those groups, but especially I would suggest with students. And students often interview best in focus groups of like, 3 to 4 kids, because then they'll talk. And I would strongly recommend that any formal interviewing or focus groups you do, for Lord's sake, record them. I'm not saying you have to video record them because that makes people self-conscious, but audio record them. Little audio recorders are pretty cheap. And of course, you can give standardized assessments. You can give pre and post surveys, pre and post tests. There are attitude inventories out there, attitude toward reading. There's all kinds of instruments you can actually use if you get to that place. If you're going to collect formal data about something, another tip, get help when you can. Other people might want to know this same stuff. Other people, including your school, might be interested in surveying maybe all of the kids in the school on their attitude toward reading. There are a number of very standard instruments that can be given in classrooms. Well, if the whole school wants to do it, then you don't need to carry it on your own. Or your reading specialist may be interested in collecting data on a group of kids, or whoever's collaborating with you on the project, or your own fellow students in our department. Sometimes our doc students are looking for a project. All kinds of things. Now, if you get our people involved and anybody plans to write about it, we have to go through the Institutional Review Board. But that can be done. It's not that difficult. It's a bit of a pain, but it's not too bad. Or make it a class project for a class in your school. I worked with a couple librarians who worked with their 9th graders to survey the middle school, the 8th graders' reading attitudes, so that the 9th grade English teachers would be prepared when the new 8th graders came. And of course, the 9th graders learned a whole lot about reading motivation and why reading was important and everything while they did that survey. So kids can help you gather data, especially if it's some kind of a class project. So I hope I've given you some ideas about the different sorts of data that you can use to evaluate the reading promotion project that you're going to do. You certainly would never use all or even half of these. This is just a whole list of possibles. And you're going to read some more about some more possible ways to collect and use and analyze data in the 2 articles for this week. One by Bates, Making the Case for Evidence-Based Practice in the Library, and one by Harper, Evaluation in the School Library as a Key to Advocacy. Because when you've got hard numbers and you can show what you're doing, you're in a much better position to make sure that the library budget isn't cut, to advocate for or keep your library aid. And even, unfortunately, there are some schools that are trying to go to half-time librarians. Well, if you can show that you're collaborating with this many teachers and they bring in their classes for work this many times, you can show that they need you. So these things are all good, right? Okay. Some optional articles out there for more ideas. There's a handout I've put together on ideas for evaluating library projects. It restates some of the things we just talked about in this and kind of goes into a little more detail. The article by Frederick called Assessing for Program Growth has some really great examples of Web 2.0 programs and ways to use them to assess for libraries. The Kramer and Dykman article talks about how to assess especially collaborative work with teachers. And the article by Marie and the other one by Hardin are both first-person, first-hand articles from librarians who are trying to put together or use assessment programs. Marie was a new teacher librarian who walked into a library that had never done any data collection or assessment, and so she kind of started from scratch. And then the Hardin article, the more recent one, is using the new American Association of School Librarians guide to program evaluation and assessment, and talks about some of the pluses and minuses, some of the things that were harder or easier, and why it helped her and why sometimes it didn't that much. So again, those are all optional. If you're looking for ideas for evaluating your project, you might want to check any or all of them out. Certainly, you're not going to read all of them, but pick and choose what looks useful to you. And you can use any or all of these, and of course your own thoughts, to get ideas for the evaluation component of your final project.